Today we're going to be working through a project called Coil Reefs and give some insight and some ideas into this fine arts production. As per usual, I'm going to start with a sort of plan of attack. This is a quick sketch of what I'm going to produce, showing the basic parts, if not the relationship to each other, sort of how they're put together. The idea is to produce a sort of undersea theme, complete with seaweed, seashells, barnacles, coral, etc., and put at least one human-made object into it to sort of break up the composition. So you can see all of those things represented in my basic sketch here, along with a mug or a cup of some type. I figured that would be easy to come by in the ceramics class. And it gives me a non-organic part to this organic type of sculpture. As I go through the basic building process, I'll go through the criteria, including size, scale, textured surfaces, etc. Here then is a quick snapshot of that criteria. It needs to be over 6 inches in all dimensions, and it must have at least 7 different types of designs, whether that's coils or slabs. It's kind of up to the artist. Many textures. And you should cover the whole thing in texture to make it look like it's been underwater for a long time. That's basically what we're looking at. I'll begin the process with a standard lump of clay and some tools that I've assembled. Most of them I'll use at one time or another. The toothpicks quite a bit. And I need a dry surface to work on, so I put down some newspaper. I'll take some of this and I'm going to just roll a slab here. First I'm going to throw it, boom, get it flat on the sides, and pat it in my hands like a pancake. Stretch it out a bit, and then I'll eventually use a roller. My minimum dimensions for this are 6 inches tall, 6 inches across, so I need a slab that's larger than 6 inches since I'm going to use a piece of paper under it to make a hump mold. Remember that the more I roll it in any given direction, the longer it gets in the direction that I roll. Now I'm going to make some textures on the surface. You can do this before or after you form this. I just find it easier to do it at the beginning and then maybe change the textures later on. I've taped some forks together here so it goes 3 times faster theoretically, and I'm just trying to give a texture over the whole surface so that I have something that will show through or in between if there's a place where I don't place something on the surface. So this is like a base texture. So now I'm going to make sort of a random hump mold just by taking some newspaper and wadding it up and putting it under the slab. And then I sort of fold the slab around the edges, making sure it sort of goes down to the bottom, covers most of the surface. And if I lose some texture because my hands are on there, I can put it back in with that fork. It doesn't have to actually be flat for me to use that. You can see that it's underneath there. If the paper sticks underneath later on, that's fine. It'll burn out in the kiln. I probably don't want the whole wad in there, but anything that sticks underneath, I'm not worried about. I'm going to cut here past a whole bunch of work, shaping and forming these different sea creatures, shells, etc., putting textures on surfaces with toothpicks and sticks and molds and cookie cutters and all sorts of stuff. So I've got these and I'm going to apply them to the surface now that I've sculpted them in form. We use the element term form here in the place of shape because shape is flat and these have 3-dimensionality to them. You may notice as I go along that the backs of these are already scored up a bit. I'm going to score them some more. The texture that I put on the surface of the slab might be enough scoring, but just in case, I'm going to score that a little bit more too before I add slip and apply each of these pieces. So let's do that quickly. You might notice that I find multiple places to place each of these. I'm just sort of finding the most open areas that I can to apply these in a way that kind of makes sense but keeps the composition all over for now. I'm going to fill in all the gaps later on, and that's going to tighten up my composition later. You may be tired of hearing this in my videos by now, but it's this important. You need to score and slip everything in place. You can score without slipping and it will probably fall off. You can slip without scoring and it may fall off pretty quickly as well. But if you score and slip together, you increase your chances of keeping everything together and making a nice tight seal. So do it on every piece that you need to apply to the surface. Score, slip, score, slip. And for the sake of strength and stability, I even score and slip parts of the slab together to make sure that they don't come apart later on and form a weak joint. Now I want to turn my attention to making things that look like barnacles, and this is a pretty easy process. I just take a bit of clay and I'm putting it around the plastic end of a paintbrush. I score and slip each of these pieces in place. Some of them are easier than others. And as I put more and more next to each other and I get more slip underneath them and score and slip them together, they create a very strong surface, each of them supporting the others, just like barnacles actually do. Next, I'm going to put in some taller barnacles to show some growth, and to do that I'm just going to make some coils, and then I will dimple them on the end using that same paintbrush. I need to score and slip them in place, and as I put them next to each other I need to score and slip them together as well. So I'm going to go up the sides of these with my scoring and my slipping and get them together. They will add strength as I put in more and more next to each other. In this case, there is strength in numbers. I'm also going to make little, I would call them ootsies, like Tootsie Rolls, but I'm going to make some lines of growth along the side, just using a toothpick and sort of rolling it across that coil. And I can still score and slip right over those growth marks. And notice I'm putting it in there and I'm connecting it to the ones next to it as well. If I forgot to put in some growth marks on some of them that are taller, I can put them in afterwards too, just being delicate with that toothpick. I can build these barnacles quickly and multiple times and put them on different parts of my composition to fill in space. They make an interesting texture and they work all over. Next, I'm going to turn my attention to something that looks more like standing coral, and to do this I'm going to make some coils, and I'm going to sort of put a couple of them together to begin with, sort of in a Y formation, like one piece is grown off another, and I'm going to start putting some texture on these surfaces and standing them up on the surface. So here I have two pieces scored and slipped together, and I'm going to start texturing it, finding interesting ways to use my toothpicks and anything I can roll or rub these on to give it an interesting corally type texture. And then I'm going to score and slip the bottom of it and score and slip a spot on my base and see if I can't put those two together. Now the first thing I put on there is going to be kind of weak. Just like the barnacles, I know that there's going to be strength in numbers, so I'm going to make more and more of this. I'm going to pack it next to each other, and wherever those pieces of coral or coral-like clay look like they're touching, they will actually be touching and scored and slipped together to hold each other up in a lattice. And that lattice may be invisible or an illusion to our eyes, but the more we put down there, the stronger it will become. Next, I'm going to turn to making some wavy underwater seagrass, and to do that I'm going to make more small coils, and I'm going to start putting them next to each other. Even before I stick them on the base, I'm going to put them in clumps. These coils, I'm not just going to leave them all as coils, I'm going to flatten them out a bit with my fingers. And by flattening them out, they will no longer look like they're just these round coils, but they will look more like they're flattened waving grass. So once I start putting them together, you'll notice I'm just sort of pushing them. I'm not doing much with them to score and slip them yet. I know that they're going to be scored and slipped on the bottom. But I'm going to flatten them out, put them next to each other, put them on top of each other. Even going to smooth them out with slip and make sure that they have sort of a dimensionality and very little texture, because these are going to be very soft looking pieces of grass. And once I have them together and get some slip on them and get them malleable, then I'm going to take a knife and I'm just going to cut off an end. I could cut them in the middle and make two clumps too. I'm going to score and slip that end because it's squished all together. Then I'm going to start setting them up. Once again, scoring and slipping everything down and in place if I can. By doing this in clumps, it gives it more strength as I put it in place, and by doing multiple clumps next to each other, you'll find that you get more and more strength the more you build. The parts on top will once again be very weak because they're not supported on the top, but the shorter those pieces are on top, the more likely they are to survive all the steps of making your sculpture and survive the kiln. And once we get glaze on them, that will just strengthen them eventually. Now that I have some barnacles and some coral and some seagrass, I think I'm going to put in my cup. I threw a cup on the wheel and I let it harden a little bit. After that I put on a handle, let that harden just a little bit, and now I'm going to make it look like it's broken and put in place. If I do this too late, I might not have room with all of my coral and seagrass and stuff. So now I'm going to come in and see how this fits on here the best I can. And to tell you the truth, I have two halves, so I may just sort of beat them both up and put two halves of the cup in here. And then I can put more coral, more barnacles, more seagrass. I don't think I need any more shells. I think I'm covering quite a bit of area. I'm going to score it, I'm going to slip it, and I'm going to press it down into this mess. You can see that to get into the fine details, I'm going in there with a tool, and I'm also going to use that to cut some chips and cracks in the side so it looks like this has been here for a while. So first I'm going to get it nicely in place, and then I can cover those seams with seagrass and barnacles and stuff. And I'm going to cut some chips and some pieces out of the side, make it look like it was broken, it fell off a ship, and it's been down here for a while. Once I get it nicely settled in place, then I can go to the next piece and I can try and put it someplace else. I figured since I had two halves, it might look like two cups if I used them in two different places. Now that I've settled on two places to put these two halves of a cup, there's going to be some empty space on the base. I can fill those with some barnacles, especially along the seams or growing up the cups. I can also fill them with more coral or seagrass. I put my signature on the bottom of one of the cups along with the date, and here's what I finally settled on. You can see there are a lot more barnacles, there's more coral, and there's more seagrass sticking out of different areas. This sort of sculpture tends to be a fine arts production where you have something that's beautiful that can be placed out for people to see, whether it's in a nook or cranny in the house, on a bookshelf, on a coffee table, etc. However, an applied arts approach can be taken as well. Here we have what appears to be a barrel on the bottom of the sea, which has a lid and doubles as a cookie jar or some sort of container. You could even do bookends. The organic shapes and the inorganic handmade shapes will create your composition.